If you're on a keto or low carb diet, or you've ever just worried about the amount of sugar in wine, then today's episode is for you. It might surprise you that keto wines, or wines that are labeled as low carb, might be a little bit misleading. As with many other things, marketing plays a big role in the consumer's perception of certain products, and it's no different with wine. Hi friends, my name is Sarah and I'm a certified sommelier and host of the Wine CEO podcast channel. And each week I bring new wine topics from around the industry to help you learn and grow with fun and approachable ways. As a certified sommelier with over 10 years in the hospitality industry and now over 6 years as a certified sommelier, I love bringing amazing wine content to you. I have over 150 episodes and 3 years of podcasting, and I love traveling the world, meeting with winemakers and industry professionals to help you learn more about wine in a way that is not intimidating, but helps you really feel confident as you grow in your wine journey. So whether you are a beginner or an expert, I hope you find my channel to be really interesting and a fun way to learn about wine. If you haven't yet, hit subscribe and follow along at The Wine CEO. All right, so the first thing we need to talk about today is really what is a keto diet? If you're not familiar, a keto or ketogenic diet is a low carb, high fat diet. And if you remember back to 5th grade biology class, sugar found in whole fruit and veggies are complex carbohydrates. So one of the main things that a lot of people on a keto diet will cut out is fruit because they don't want these complex carbohydrates in their diet. They're trying to keep a low sugar, low carb, high fat diet so that their body enters something called ketosis, which helps them burn fat. So you can probably guess where I'm going here. And yes, a lot of people that are on a keto or ketogenic diet will cut out wine. Wine is made from grape juice, and so naturally there's a lot of sugar in grape juice. So a lot of folks that are in a low carb diet will cut out a lot of different alcoholic substances. They typically will cut out beers, they cut out wine, they cut out hard liquor. They look for options that are really low carb, low sugar. And if you are on a low carb diet, then maybe someone has told you in the past that you need to cut out wine because it is empty calories or it's high sugar and it's high carbohydrates. So I have people ask me all the time, are there low carb or low sugar wine options? They might say, hey, I'm on a keto diet and I can't really have high sugar. So what wines can I enjoy? So let's just take a moment and break down what wine is. So I've talked in the show before about how wine is fermented grape juice, right? And in order to get grapes that can actually have a decent amount of alcohol, we're actually using a specific variety of grape that gets really, really sweet in the vineyard. I've had the opportunity to walk through vineyards and taste actual grapes, and it is so different than table grapes you might find in the grocery stores. These are really, really sweet grapes, and so naturally it has a lot of sugar in it. Well, when the grapes are harvested, they are pressed, and either natural yeast or biologically manufactured yeast is added, and that helps the process of fermentation begin. And in the process of fermentation, the yeast is eating the sugar in the grape juice and converting that sugar to alcohol. So what you will find typically is that the higher alcohol content in a wine, the lower the sugar content, and vice versa. Often, if you have a higher sugar content in a wine, then you have a lower alcohol by volume percentage because the yeast did not eat as much of the sugar to convert it into alcohol. Now, there are always exceptions to every rule, and there are some winemakers that will have a higher alcohol wine that still has a lot of sugar in it, either because the grapes started with a lot of sugar, or maybe they added sugar in the process so that they could continue that fermentation and get a higher alcohol, but they still wanted a sweeter wine. Now, in some regions of the world, this process called chaptalization is illegal, and so you can't add sugar to the wine, but in some regions it is allowed, and so winemakers can do that. You can also have wines that have a really high alcohol content because they're fortified with brandy. I've talked about that on the show before, but again, outside of these exceptions, typically when we're talking table wines, you will find that a higher alcohol percent means that there's going to be a little bit less sugar in it. Now, before I go any further and I start to kind of dismiss maybe some common myths about low carb wines, I have to make the quick disclaimer that I am not a doctor, I'm not a healthcare professional. So if you have diabetes or if you are following a keto or low carb diet, please make sure you consult your doctor. What I'm sharing today are my opinions and just some general facts about wine that can help you make the best informed decision for your diet and your body. But again, I'm not a healthcare professional. So with that disclaimer out of the way, I'm going to share a little secret with you because I have been really frustrated with a lot of wine marketing in general. I think it's hard for consumers to understand exactly what is in their wine. One, because we do not require in the US and in most countries to have a nutritional facts label on the bottle. And so you don't necessarily know how many calories or how much sugar or even all of the ingredients that could be in a particular bottle. And that can be really frustrating. But then you have some specific companies that label their wines as low carb, low sugar, keto wines, and I find that this can be a little bit misleading for the average consumer that isn't as familiar with wine. So here's my little secret for you. Did you know that the average table wine only has 1 to 3 grams of sugar per serving? In fact, the USDA came out a few years ago saying that the average table wine has 1 to 2 grams per every 5 ounces in a bottle. Now we're talking average table wine. So this is going to be the standard wine that you find on the shelves in the grocery store. And so you're probably having a moment of like, wait a second, that's amazing. That's what I would be looking for in an alcoholic beverage. And yep, you're right. So I feel like it's a little bit misleading when some of these brands come out and they say that their wines are healthy wines, they're low carb, they're low sugar, and then they're saying, yeah, and we're only, 1.5 grams of sugar per serving or 2 grams of sugar per serving, and we are the keto option, the low carb, healthy wine option. Well, that's what all table wines are, right? And so it's really misleading to the consumer that suddenly thinks, oh, well, if this is the healthy option, this is my alternative to regular wine, then clearly a standard glass of wine must be so much more. It must have much higher sugar, but it doesn't. And in my experience, I've tried a lot of these, kind of healthy wines and the ones that are marketed as being, lower sugar. And in my personal opinion, and I've tried quite a few of them, I haven't tried them all, so I can't speak for every single one, but often they're not great quality wine. They don't taste very good because the focus from that brand is more on the marketing that this is a healthy option, it's a low carb option, than focusing on making a really great quality wine. So that is my secret, because a lot of people don't know that most wines only have 1 to 2 grams of sugar per serving, per 5-ounce glass anyway, which is your standard serving of a glass of wine. And so you don't have to necessarily go out and go shopping for a wine that's labeled as healthy or keto or low carb if you are looking to cut out some sugars. Now, I mentioned a moment ago that the way that you can find the lower sugar options is to look for higher alcohol content. And I've mentioned on the show before that often a lot of like bold red wines will have higher alcohol by volume. But before you panic and think that you're going to have to spend the rest of your life drinking bold red wines, there's actually a bit of a misconception that all white wines and sparkling wines, or many of them, have a little bit more sugar than red wine. Totally not true. Just to use it as an example, did you know that a glass of Brut champagne will have less than 2 grams of sugar per serving? And if you can find Extra Brut or Brut Nature, it's going to have less than half to 1 gram of sugar per serving. So you can find sparkling wine, you can find some great wine options that are also low sugar, low carb. If you are looking for lower sugar white wines, I would recommend checking out Sauvignon Blanc, Chardonnay, Pinot Grigio, and Albarino, as these are all known for being drier styles of white varieties with less than 2 grams of sugar per serving. Some of the ones I would stay away from are Moscato d'Asti, ice wine, and sweet Rieslings. These are not all encompassing, but I recommend these 3 because there are some common white wines that you might find that tend to almost always be much sweeter and they have a higher sugar content. Now, I mentioned sweet Rieslings because, believe it or not, actually most Rieslings are dry. And especially if you find most Rieslings that are directly from Germany, they're going to be very dry. As consumers in the US, I feel like most folks have come to know Rieslings as sweeter, and so we often find a lot of styles of Riesling in the US that typically tend a little bit sweeter, just because that's been the perception of the US consumer. But there are a lot of Rieslings that are dry, and in fact, that is the main style of the grape. And the good news, if you like red wines, is that most red wines tend to be typically dry in style just by nature. Almost anything over 12% alcohol by volume is going to be a very dry red. And honestly, most styles from Pinot Noir, Merlot, Syrah, Cabernet Sauvignon, Chianti, you name it, they're all going to be rather low in sugar. And so you're going to find less than 2 grams of sugar per serving and often around 1 gram or less in many of those wines. Remember that the higher alcohol by volume you go, the lower sugar content. So even if you get up to like a 15 or 16% red alcohol, that's going to be really bold. And so you're not going to have a lot of sugar in that. In fact, it's going to be almost bone dry because those are really high ABV wines. But again, most reds that are out on the market are going to be fairly low sugar just naturally. If you're definitely looking to stay away from sweet wines, when it comes to reds, you want to stay away from ports, Vinsanto, Lambrusco, Brachetto d'Acqui. These are just all typical styles that tend to have a little more sugar content in them. And so those are ones that you're probably going to stay away from. Again, these two lists are not all encompassing, but it just gives you some quick ideas if you're looking for some wines that you want to try or stay away from if you are intentionally shopping for some lower carb, lower sugar options. But again, in my opinion, everything in moderation, right? I typically don't lean towards sweeter wines in general, just personally my preference. I've never really been a big fan of soda or juices. I just don't drink a lot of things with sugar in them. But a couple times a year, I love having a glass of port. I love having Vinsanto around the holidays, dipping cookies in it. So there's a lot of opportunities to enjoy sweet wines, but again, I think everything in moderation. So I hope today's episode debunked some myths you might have about sugar content in wines and some of those labels out there that claim to be healthy or keto. I hope that it was an interesting one for you. If you loved today's episode, like it and share with a friend. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. If you don't follow me on Instagram, head over at The Wine CEO. I would love to interact with you there. And as always, if you have questions, you can drop them below or send me an email, sarah@thewineceo.podcast. I hope you drink something new and delicious this week, friends, and I will catch you all in the next episode of the Wine CEO Podcast.